The relief vessel pitched through December waters the color of slate and spite. Duncan Crowe gripped the rail, watching the lighthouse emerge from the mist like a broken tooth against the sky. Scaramore, the lone rock. 23 days since the light had gone dark. "Something's wrong," muttered Hamish, the ship's captain, his weathered face creased with more than the usual concern. "The landing platform, look." The wooden crane used for loading supplies hung at an unnatural angle, its rope swaying in the wind, though no cargo dangled from it. The iron railings were slick with something darker than seawater. Duncan shouldered his pack and prepared to disembark. As the third assistant keeper, he'd been designated for the relief rotation. 3 keepers manned the lighthouse. Rowan Gilchrist, the principal keeper with 20 years of service. Peter Blackwood, first assistant, and a quiet man who reads scripture by candlelight. And young Callum Reed, barely 21, on his second posting. 3 men who hadn't responded to signals in over 3 weeks. The boat's tender scraped against the stone. Duncan climbed the 160 steps carved into the rock, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The wind had a voice here, not howling, but something worse. Something that sounded almost like words in a language the throat wasn't meant to shape. The lighthouse door stood open. "Hello?" Duncan's voice died on the threshold. He tried again, louder. "Gilchrist? Blackwood? Anyone?" Silence answered, thick and waiting. He stepped inside. The kitchen was set for a meal never eaten. 3 plates on the table, crusted with food gone to mold. Potatoes, salt fish, bread. A keeper's standard fare, now hosting blooms of green and white fungi. The kettle sat on the stove, cold, a skin of something oily floating on the surface of the water within. 3 chairs, 2 pushed neatly in, 1 overturned on its side. The clock on the wall had stopped at 8:42, its hands frozen in permanent vigil. Duncan moved through the space slowly, his keeper's training cataloging every detail. The oil lamps were full, wicks trimmed, the supply room was well stocked. The beds in the sleeping quarters were made with military precision, except for one, which looked slept in but not disturbed, as if someone had simply evaporated from beneath the covers. A wool coat hung by the door, and when Duncan touched it, still damp with salt spray, he jerked his hand back. The fabric was ice cold, yes, but there was something else. A smell. Not rot, not decay, but something mineral and ancient, like the scent of deep ocean trenches where sunlight had never penetrated. The light was failing fast outside. Duncan lit a lamp, and the warm glow only made the shadows deeper, hungrier. He found himself glancing at the windows, at the dark squares of glass that reflected his own face back at him, with unsettling clarity. But it was the logbook that made Duncan's skin prickle. He opened it with trembling fingers, flipping to the final entries. Rowan's handwriting, usually precise as copperplate, deteriorated across the pages. December 12th. Storm winds. Force 9. All stores are secure. B is behaving strangely. Says he hears singing from the water. Told him it's just the wind in the rocks. Made him drink hot tea and take his rest. Must keep watch on him. December 12th, 2100 hours. PB awoke screaming. Says he dreamed of drowning, but it wasn't drowning. Said he was breathing underwater. Breathing and singing. CR reports he heard music in his sleep as well. I hear nothing. My ears are not what they were. Perhaps that is a blessing. December 13th. Storm worsening. PB won't come down from the light room. Found him staring at the sea for 3 hours, hand pressed against the glass. Says something is calling him. The singing. CR confirms he can hear it too. They tried to describe it to me. Said it sounds like voices, but also like the creaking of ship hulls under deep pressure. Like bones breaking underwater. I hear nothing but the gale. Thank God for deafness. December 13th evening. CR asked me if I remember learning to swim. Of course I do, I told him. He said no. Do I remember first learning to swim? Before I was born? He's feverish. Must be. The isolation gets to young men. I've seen it before. December 14th. Storm beyond anything I've witnessed in 20 years at sea. But here's what troubles me. The sea is wrong. The waves move against the wind. They should be breaking from the southwest, but they're coming from all directions at once, as if the island is the center of something. PB tried to leave during my watch. Found him at the door in his underclothes, barefoot on the stone, saying he had to answer, had to go down, had to return. Those were his words. Return. Lock the door. God forgive me, but I locked him in the supply room. He's weeping like a child. Or laughing. I can't tell anymore. The handwriting grew erratic, slanting downward across the page. December 15th. It's not a storm. The water is rising, but there's no wind. No wind at all. Dead calm. The waves come anyway, climbing higher. They're trying to reach us. CR is gone. I turned my back for 30 seconds, and he's gone. The door was still locked. PB is laughing in the supply room, laughing and laughing. Says he can see them through the cracks. Says they're beautiful. They want us to look. The final entry was a single line, written in letters 2 inches tall. Don't look at the water. Duncan's hands shook. He set the logbook down carefully, as if it might shatter. The lighthouse was empty. He'd checked every room, every corner. 3 men vanished. The only evidence of their existence was this record of mounting madness. He should signal the ship, tell Hamish to wait. But sunset was approaching, and the light had to be operational. 23 days dark meant ships had been navigating blind through these treacherous passages. Duty demanded the light be restored. Duncan climbed the spiral stairs, his footsteps ringing hollow. The light room at the top was pristine, too pristine. The brass fittings gleamed as if freshly polished. The lenses were immaculate. There was no reason the light should have failed. He checked the mechanisms. Everything was in order. He wound the clockwork that would rotate the lens array and set the timing. As the sun bled into the horizon, Duncan lit the mantle. Light exploded outward, sweeping across the sea in measured revolutions. That's when he saw them. Shapes in the water, not quite surfacing, not quite submerged. They moved with a fluidity that was wrong, limbs that bent at too many joints, forms that suggested human proportions the way a fever dream suggests reality. There were dozens of them, maybe more. The light swept across them with each rotation, offering glimpses that the mind couldn't quite assemble into coherence. And they were swimming toward the lighthouse. No, not swimming, rising. The water around the island was lifting, defying every law of nature Duncan knew. It wasn't a wave. Waves had shape, direction, purpose, driven by wind and tide. This was different. The ocean was climbing the rocks in a slow-motion tsunami that made no sound, no crash of surf, no roar of breaking water. It crept upward like something alive and purposeful, and within it, the shapes became clearer. Faces, or what had been faces once. Duncan's rational mind tried to reject what his eyes reported. Those weren't the missing keepers in the water. Couldn't be. The dead don't swim. The dead don't move with such terrible grace. But the corpse-white skin, blue-tinged and waterlogged, the mouths stretched open in soundless screams that showed too many teeth. Teeth that had grown, multiplied, sharpened. The eyes that reflected the lighthouse beam with a light of their own, a bioluminescence like deep-sea fish, cold and hungry. He recognized Peter Blackwood's beard, now tangled with something that writhed like kelp but moved with intention. Rowan's wool sweater, torn and dripping, exposing skin that had begun to split into gill-like slits. Young Callum's face, if faces could be inverted, turned inside out like a sock, the wet red meat of what should be internal, now external. Teeth visible from behind, eyes looking in and out simultaneously. They were changing, or being changed, or remembering what they'd always been beneath the thin mask of humanity. And they were singing. He couldn't hear it, but he could feel it, a vibration that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his skull. A calling that spoke to something ancient and submerged in the human hindbrain. The part that crawled from the ocean a billion years ago and never quite forgot. The part that still carried the genetic memory of gills, of breathing water, of belonging to the crushing dark. Come down, the singing said without words. Come home. Come deep. Come forever. The singing had texture, temperature. It felt like cold water filling his lungs, but pleasant, natural, right. It felt like the pressure of the deep, which wasn't crushing but embracing, a return to the womb of the world. Duncan's hands went to his throat, feeling for gills that weren't there yet, fingers exploring his neck with a hunger that terrified him even as he did it. He wanted them. God help him, he wanted the slits to open in his flesh. Wanted to feel water flowing through them, oxygenating blood that suddenly seemed too thick for air. Duncan stumbled backward, his hand finding the logbook's warning, "Don't look at the water," but it was too late, he'd already seen. And having seen, he understood what had driven 3 men to madness. They weren't trying to reach the lighthouse, they were trying to stop him from looking. The ones in the water now, they'd failed. They'd looked too long, listened too deeply, remembered too much, and now they wanted company in their transformation. Misery loves company, but this was worse. This was evolutionary regression, demanding communion. The water climbed higher, now lapping at the base of the tower. Impossible. The lighthouse stood 150 feet above sea level, yet the ocean rose anyway, patient and inexorable. Duncan ran down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. He had to signal the ship, had to warn them. But when he reached the lower level, he found the door sealed, not locked, but fused, as if the metal and wood had grown together. The windows showed only water, pressing against the glass with the weight of 1,000 depths. The singing grew louder, more insistent. He understood now why the others had failed. The singing didn't drive you mad with fear. It was worse than that. It made you remember. Remember what you'd been before you had legs to stand on land, before you had lungs to breathe air. It reminded you that humanity was just a thin veneer over something older, something that belonged to the deep places. And the deep places wanted their children back. Duncan pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound wasn't sound. It was feeling, sensation, memory. He saw himself walking down to the water's edge. Saw himself stepping in, clothes and all. Saw the shapes welcoming him with embraces that would crush and comfort simultaneously. So lonely up there, the singing whispered, so cold in the light. Come down where it's dark and warm, and you'll never be alone again. Come down where we remember what you really are. The water was seeping under the door now, black and thick as oil. Duncan scrambled up the stairs again, flight by flight, the water following. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. It wanted him. In the light room, he barricaded himself against the door. The beam continued its patient rotation, sweeping across seas that no longer moved like water should move. The shapes circled below, no longer rising but waiting. They had time, the sea had nothing but time. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, though the temperature had dropped, until his breath came in white clouds. They were shaking, because he wanted to open the door, wanted it with an intensity that made his chest ache. The logical part of his mind, the part that had studied navigation and meteorology and the rational sciences, screamed that this was madness. But the older part, the part that still remembered the womb, the amniotic fluid, the floating before breath, that part said, yes, go down. It's where you belong. Duncan found Peter Blackwood's Bible on a shelf, hands scrabbling for anything to anchor his mind. He opened it at random, desperate for anything to anchor his thoughts to the solid world of land and air and light. The pages were all the same verse, written over and over in increasingly frantic handwriting, cramping and spiraling across every page, filling the margins, bleeding into the header. And the sea gave up the dead that were in it. Over and over, hundreds of times, thousands, Peter had written until his hand must have cramped into a claw. until ink ran dry, and he'd used his own blood, rust-brown words, testifying to his deteriorating grip on sanity. But the verse was incomplete. Duncan knew the rest, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. Hell. The word rattled in his skull like a stone in a tin can. What if hell wasn't fire and brimstone? What if the old monks and preachers had it backwards? What if hell was depth and pressure and darkness? What if hell was remembering you'd once had gills? What if damnation wasn't burning but drowning? Drowning forever while breathing, while singing, while calling others to join the choir beneath the waves. The door began to splinter. Duncan made his choice then, not the choice they wanted, not the choice they expected. He grabbed the can of lamp oil, splashing it across the floor, the walls, and himself. The fumes made his eyes water. The singing reached a crescendo, fury and hunger and betrayal, all mixed into that wordless call. As the door burst inward and water flooded the light room, Duncan struck a match. The flame caught instantly, racing across the oil in a roaring wave. The last thing he saw was the shapes recoiling, retreating back into the depths as fire consumed the lighthouse from the inside out. The last thing he thought was, "At least I chose." The relief vessel found the lighthouse still burning 3 days later. The stone tower stood intact, but the interior was ash and char. No bodies were recovered. The official report cited a tragic accident. Lamp oil ignited, and the keepers were lost in the blaze. But Hamish, the ship's captain, swore something else. He swore that for 3 days, the sea around Scaramore moved wrong. Swore he saw shapes in the water, circling endlessly, furious at being denied. And he swore that on still nights when the wind drops and the water goes glass smooth, you can still hear singing rising from the depths. Not a song of beauty, but of hunger, of patient, eternal hunger. The lighthouse was never manned again. They said it was because of the tragedy, because 3 men had died there, and now a 4th. But the sailors knew better. They knew the light had revealed something in those waters that was never meant to be seen. Something that had waited in the dark for centuries, calling to the part of humanity that still remembered the sea. And some calls, once heard, can never be unheard. The Scaramore Lighthouse stands empty to this day, automated, remote, safe. But on December nights when the beam sweeps across the water, some claim the light catches things moving beneath the surface. Things that look almost human, almost. And if you listen closely, though you shouldn't, you really shouldn't, you might hear them singing still. Come down, they call, come home, come deep, come forever. The sea is patient, the sea remembers, and the sea never stops calling its children home. If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.